a very lovely and to have you here as our guest this weekend. This week, it's a Monday evening. It's a very balmy evening here in Dublin. I'm not quite sure where you are, but we're joined by a lot of folk from across Ireland and actually England.
I'm in Donegal.
You're in Donegal, and it's hard enough to get the sunshine in Donegal, but I see you have it through the window, so you're blessed. Thank you very much for joining us. For all those in attendance tonight, I'm sure you're all well aware that Anne is an investigative journalist. She has done serious work down through the decades, investigating what was used to be called or framed as the Troubles when I was growing up, Anne. And actually, from that murder triangle that you refer to, that you investigated in this book, I am from Mid Ulster, from the town of Cookstown. After reading the book this weekend, it brought back a lot of stories that I would have heard from my parents as well, and down through the years, and that the unresolved, in many instances, cases of injustice. So thank you for joining us this evening. And this came about, for folk who may not be aware, through Emma Brown, a good friend and comrade of ours who met Anne at the Tyrone Association. So without further ado, I would actually like Emma to introduce and to kickstart this conversation. You're welcome here, Emma.
Thank you, Róisín, and hi to Anne. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. I should start by saying my name is not Gabby Brown, that is my daughter, and I don't know how to change my name on the system, so I'm going to be Gabby Brown for the duration. Um, I heard you speak at the Tyrone Association of Dublin, and I was totally captivated. Somebody tried to speak to me during your speaking, and your talk, and I had to sort of say, I'll speak to you after," because it was just I suppose, even though I'm from Derry, I grew up in relative peaceful environment, and I'm coming at this history and this, the dark past of Northern Ireland, kind of almost retrospectively through the lens of everything that's happening in Gaza, and Palestine. And I know that's not the normal course for most people, but it's where I've landed. And you know what they say about new converts. You're just trying to get every bit of information. So I was very kind, and I gave Róisín what you described as not the summer read. I gave Róisín the Lethal Allies, and I read Crossing Over, which you can see has loads of tabs on it, which I really enjoyed. The first thing that occurred to me in relation to Crossing Over was the fact that and I will be very careful here not to have any spoilers, but the protagonist is from the UK, and she comes to Northern Ireland as a solicitor, as a not to turn it into book club, but as a protagonist. That is a really interesting narration point, because you're seeing Northern Ireland through new eyes, I suppose. And sometimes we can't see the wood for the trees, and we think things are normal when they're really not normal. And through Lena Dawson's viewpoint, you've got a very fresh perspective. But of course, the reality is that is how you came to Northern Ireland. I think, was it 1981? And so you came in as a journalist, with the best of intentions. And I
Well, I don't know
think,
about the best of intentions, because I came as a journalist to try and further my own career. I wouldn't
yeah,
want to make any altruistic claims about why
yeah,
I came to Ireland. I was curious, and it was the biggest story in the world in 1981, the hunger strikes. And I was fascinated. I came over, I came over the first time I came over was my annual leave. I decided the only way I could get to Ireland, and nobody would send me from where I was working at the time in Yorkshire. Nobody, I mean, it was international news, but the newspaper I was working for certainly wouldn't have sent me. So I came over on my annual leave on holiday. Well, it wasn't a holiday, but I was in Dublin when Bobby Sands died. I was in the north for the week preceding that, and I was in Derry as well. And all the photographs I took when I got home, this is in the days before mobile, smartphones and everything. When I got home, all the photographs I took were all out of focus because I was shaking so much, with a combination of fear, fascination, horror. I don't know. I was shaking so much. I was so tense and shaking so much because that's what the place was like at the time, that all the photographs I took were out of sync, out of focus. And I actually spent the next month or so after I got back from Ireland. I was a member of the Labour Party at that point. I joined as a student in Exeter when I was studying, and then I'd stayed a member when I was in London. I was in Hampstead at Labour Party. Diane Abbott actually was a fellow party member with me. And then when I went to Bradford, I was a journalist in Bradford in Yorkshire. I stayed as a member and I went over to Ireland. And when I came back, I did a series of talks all around Yorkshire about the hunger strike. I had a plastic bullet with me, and I had a page of the Irish News with advertisements, such and such a street supports the hunger strikers, a whole page of a list of all these streets and people who supported the hunger strike. And then when I was in Belfast in the week before Bobby Sands died, I witnessed my first Orange Parade, and I saw the UDA parading on the Shankill Road. It's hardly surprising, as a kind of complete ingenue, that I went back to England utterly horrified because it was not at all what I expected, and made up my mind to come back. But you said I came over with the best of intentions. I'm not sure they were the best of intentions. It was a mixture of curiosity, and also wanting to make a career for myself, being frank about it.
Just in relation to whatever your intentions were, you had a very interesting story about one of your first evenings working in the BBC. Was it the radio?
Yeah, yeah.
Do you want to
Yeah,
explain
I'll
that
tell you
story?
that story. It's
Uh-huh.
because it's one of the motivations for writing Crossing Over. I managed to get a job with the BBC, which was amazing, really, because the MI5 man in BBC Broadcasting House in London definitely wasn't doing his job. Because I had gone around Labour Party branches in Yorkshire, giving talks about the hunger strike with my plastic bullet and my page from the Irish News. And somehow nobody noticed because I got a job at the BBC. And in those days, maybe even now, people who apply to work for the BBC are vetted. There used to be an office, I believe, in Broadcasting House in London, where an MI5 gentleman used to look at the CVs and check out the background of people who applied for jobs with the BBC. But anyhow, cut a long story short, I got a job. I went to work in Belfast, and the first overnight duty I was on, about a few months, maybe 6 months after I arrived in 1981, my first overnight duty was it was a situation then in the BBC in Belfast where it was a 24/7 news desk because there was so much happening right, left, and centre that they had to have somebody in the newsroom 24/7. And it was my turn. I was on the graveyard shift. And about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, I got a phone call from the RUC press office to say that a car with three armed and dangerous IRA men in it had crashed through a roadblock in County Armagh, North County Armagh, and the police had opened fire in self-defense and killed the three men inside dead. And I was 27 then, and I was on my own, and I was a newly arrived in Belfast. I mean, even if I had been older and I was experienced, I would still have done the same thing, which is that there was no option but to report what the police say. And I did, and it was the headline news on the next morning's bulletins. And it was only later on I discovered, of course, that the whole thing was a complete fabrication, that they hadn't crashed through a roadblock, there had been no roadblock, that they weren't armed and dangerous, and they'd just been executed. I was really pissed off about it. I didn't like the fact that I'd been hoodwinked. And it was my first experience in Belfast of being lied to. And nobody had told me that I'd been lied. I knew I'd been lied to because I knew I was on the desk that night. I'd taken the phone call, I'd reported the news, and subsequently discovered that it wasn't true. And then that led to John Stalker coming over, and then he was smeared. But it always rankled with me. I always felt that I'd been used, and it annoyed me. And I thought when I first started thinking about writing my first book of fiction, which was in about 2000 and 2002, I think it was. Maybe 2004. But anyhow, it struck me that I should use that. I should get my own back. So I decided to write it with a focus on shoot to kill, which I did. So that's a long story from a short question. Sorry about that,
No,
Emma.
no, that's very interesting. And I mean, if that did rankle with your career that ensued and with your book, there was definitely great revenge. Revenge is the wrong word, but
Well, I got my,
you
well,
you worked with that revenge, with that feeling of
yeah.
violation very
I mean,
well.
nothing could bring those three men back to life again.
No.
Nothing could restore their families' lives, but um, I did what I could to put the record straight. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to go back to a point that you made earlier about before coming to Ireland that you in your student days you worked with or you were a member of the British Labour Party. And I'd just be curious to know how you felt about how that party has progressed and where they are at the moment.
Well, very briefly, when I came to Ireland, my membership lapsed. I
Yeah.
don't disagree with the Labour Party's view that it should not organise in Northern Ireland. Although, in one way, I wish they would, because then they'd be forced to face up to the internal contradictions of kind of colonial inheritance and everything. It would force them to. At the moment, they just ignore Northern Ireland largely. And if they did have a membership in Northern Ireland, they'd be forced to deal with the internal contradictions that would throw up. But I didn't rejoin the Labour Party, but I rekindled my interest when Jeremy Corbyn got elected leader. I had at that time a very, very good friend who was working as an official for the Labour Party. And I always kept in touch with him. And we talked frequently about where the party was going. And although I wasn't a member, but I rekindled my interest when Jeremy Corbyn was leader. But inevitably, of course, they got him. And it was horrific. And now I have very little hope in Andy Burnham. I don't think he's going to be a huge, I've watched as a former member of the Labour Party, I've watched all the politicians that Labour sends across, people like, there's the occasional one who's not quite as bad as the rest, like Mo Mowlam, but you look at people like Peter Mandelson and others that were sent across who were just no hopers and did everything they could to hold the place back. And one gets very disillusioned. But when I joined in Exeter, when I was in the mid 1970s, I was full of enthusiasm and stood for election. But alas and alack, things have got worse and worse since.
Yeah, you find yourself wondering, is that the way that all party politics inevitably go?
And I blame Margaret Thatcher. Blame her for a lot of things. I don't think Britain will ever recover from unless there's a revolution. I don't think Britain will ever recover from the baleful influence of Margaret Thatcher, because basically she sold everything off. And Tony Blair followed in her footsteps. And she changed the fulcrum. The fulcrum of British politics changed during Margaret Thatcher's reign, if that's the right word. And I don't think it hasn't gone back to what it was. I mean, when you had people like Michael Foot and Tony Benn and other people, there was sort of hope that the Labour Party would make life better for people in Britain. But alas, that has not. Since Thatcher sold off all the houses, she sold off a lot of the utilities. And will the British working class ever recover?
Don't go off the wall.
I doubt it.
Thanks, Emma. I maybe come in at this stage, if that's all right. And because I'm conscious of time as well, and just a reminder, if everyone could please mute so that there is no crossover. So if it's okay, and I mean, you've sort of alluded to your experience or the shock or the wake-up call, and of arriving in the north and seeing the reality and how, as well, I suppose the BBC and the establishment press write the story and continue to tell the stories, that don't all usually align with the reality on the ground, or certainly they don't tell the news through the perspective of the working class. But to touch on this book, if I have three questions really, so I won't keep you long. But the first one when I was reading this is that, this book exposes an awful lot, and there's extensive evidence of the collusion between the British state and the British state forces and the loyalist paramilitary. So if we were to look back, because that's more than a decade ago that the book was actually written, looking back, do you think that what has changed, in your opinion, rather, in public understanding? And what truths are still being resisted? Because you spoke about that initial landing in the north to tell a story, and then the truth not being exposed. The whole
Well,
thing.
first of all, I'd like to correct. I mean, I'm often referred to as an investigative journalist. I'm actually not, because I find I'm not the sharpest tool in the box, and I know what I'm talking about. It's not false modesty. I really take my hat off to other colleagues of mine, or former colleagues of mine, who are investigative journalists. I was prepared to keep an open mind, and if I got the opportunity, I would ask questions. But The Lethal Allies was a brilliant book, but it wasn't because of me. It was because of 10 years of hard work that went into investigating collusion in Mid-Ulster in the 1970s before I ever joined the Pat Finucane Centre. And the first thing they asked me to do was write a book about collusion. I'd never I believed the collusion was possible. I didn't dismiss it out of hand, but I didn't really believe that it was as systemic as I now do believe. And when they asked me to write a book about collusion, I was horrified. First of all, because for personal reasons, my husband had just been diagnosed with Parkinson's, and I quit journalism in order to have more time and energy to look after him. And I certainly didn't want to write a book. That was the last thing I wanted to do. But I had no choice, because I just had accepted a new job, and the first thing they'd asked me to do was write a book. So I had really no choice but to write it. But it was very, very tough. What do I think has changed? Well, I think the book, and again, I make no claim for myself, but I think that the 10 years of hard work, in fact, 20 years of hard work that went into it, that was done by my colleagues in the Pat Finucane Centre, also by some very brave former British detectives who worked for the Historical Inquiries team. And the HET Historical Inquiries team was not perfect at all, but we were very lucky in as much as we got some very intelligent and honest guys who worked investigating. They were the ones who did the investigating, because the thing about collusion is a unique crime, because the perpetrators of the crime, the criminals, are in charge of the evidence. Because if the criminals, when it comes to collusion, are the police, which they are, then they are in charge of the evidence. The police aren't out there looking for the evidence. The police have the evidence. They're hiding it. And the evidence that people need is all locked up in a safe place outside Carrickfergus called Sea Park, which actually features in Crossing Over as well. But all the evidence, all the murder files, well, not all of them, because some police some of them took them home with them when they retired. And of course, there's MI5 as well, and there's British military intelligence. But certainly some of the evidence that is needed by investigators to get to the truth is all in Sea Park under lock and key. And you can't go in there unless you're security vetted to the nth degree. So the evidence, such as it is there, but none, people like me, journalists and human rights investigators and lawyers, can't get in there because we're not allowed in there. It's all under lock and key. And you're only allowed in if you've been security vetted. Where we were lucky was that some of the people we worked with in the HET were security vetted. And when the PFC first met them, they talked about alleged collusion and propaganda and speculation, blah, blah, blah. But once they've seen the files, once they've seen the evidence, then they became convinced that we were right, that there was collusion, and you could prove it. And when I first joined the PFC, the evidence was there, and I was asked to channel this evidence into a book, into something that was readable. And I did my very, very best to do that. But the narrative has changed, was I don't think in Ireland anymore you hear politicians in Leinster House, etc., talk about alleged collusion. I think that if they're honest and I think the book, and I don't make no claims to myself, but I think the book has changed the narrative in Ireland on collusion, because you cannot deny it. If you're honest and you read that book and you look at the evidence in case after case after case after case, it's there. The evidence is there. Informers who were protected, investigations that were hidden, CID officers who were supposed to investigate bombings and shootings, from whom the evidence was hidden by special branch. I mean, it's all there in the book. You've just read it, so you know.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, can I just say, Róisín, the book, for anybody who doesn't know, as I understand it, and it's now an official legal exhibit. Is that
First
right?
book ever to make an official legal in the High
Yeah,
Court in Belfast. One of the
yeah.
most satisfying moments of my life was walking into the High Court in Belfast and seeing Mr. Justice Seamus Tracy sitting on his bench with lethal allies in front of him, dog-eared and marked with stickers coming out of it. And I saw that and I went, oh my God. And in the recent report that John Boucher did into Operation Canova into Scappaticci, a completely different investigation, he cited lethal allies as part of that report. And I mean, a lot of my colleagues, when they knew I was writing a book about collusion, were very sniffy about it. And I was sniffy about it. I mean, I didn't want to write it. I didn't think you could prove it. I thought, well, I'm going to screw such a reputation. If I have a reputation at all, I'm going to lose it now because I'm going to write a book that no one's going to believe. But actually, as the time has passed, people have believed it. And I think that, as I said, the narrative has changed, that people don't talk about alleged collusion anymore. You can't avoid it. And even John Boucher, who's currently the chief constable of the PSNI, I mean, he's been absolutely outspoken about collusion, both in private and public. It happened.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
not
Can't
the
deny
kind
it.
of the Sinn Féin propaganda and Republicans trying to undermine the state. It actually happened, and people died. A lot of people died unnecessarily, and it was a disaster, both from the individuals who were killed and also from the point of view of the state, because it just, people knew what was going on. I mean, nationalist people in the North aren't stupid. They knew what was going on at the time, and it didn't bring the conflict to an end any sooner, any more than Scappaticci brought the conflict to an end any sooner. It was just yet another cynical, failed British security policy, and that people in Ireland paid the price.
Absolutely. Well, I think everybody knew. I mean, everybody knew collusion. We just didn't have the means,
No,
or
you didn't have the proof,
the,
but proof is so important.
we might have had the proof, but we didn't have a voice to be able to even prove it, because we didn't even have social media. And then we didn't have an alternative media outlet to be able to. We tried very hard, and there were many attempts, to have an alternative media. Like, we continue to have parallel, I suppose, institutions to be able to have our voices heard, but it was just impossible to have that published, even if it could be proven.
Well, the one thing that families want, in my experience, is families want to see the evidence. And they didn't have the evidence. I mean, it's one thing saying, oh, all the UDR patrols in the area disappeared just before the shooting. That's not evidence of anything. It's circumstantial. And I mean, as a journalist, I was a doubting Thomas. I was the person who wanted to put their finger in the wound. I wanted to see the evidence, documentary evidence. And I didn't think it was possible, which is why one of the reasons I didn't want to write the book, Lethal Allies, but I did, as you know. But I didn't think it was possible. But the HET, the people we work with in the HET, and they are the unsung heroes of this story, because those people were fearless, and they did go and find the evidence, and they did tell the families. And now you're seeing the results. I mean, you had Eugene Reevy the other day being awarded £400,000. And I mean, he didn't take a civil action against the state because he wanted the money. Obviously, he wanted the truth about why his three brothers were slaughtered. But, and there's a lot more of that coming down the pike. There's an awful lot of families who are looking, who want the truth. But you see, the government, what happens is they get so far in their pursuit of a civil action, and then their lawyers tell them, because they have to tell them, that you could lose this case, and if you do, you're going to have to pay your own legal fees and the government's legal fees, or you can settle now on the and the government will pay you a lot of money, and they won't tell the truth, but that's as good as you're going to get. And people do they and who can blame them, because if you're an ordinary working class family living in the rural mid Ulster, and you're being told by your own lawyer, listen, if we push this to the nth degree, you could still lose. And in which case you'll have to sell your house, you'll have your entire financial circumstances will be destroyed, because you'll have to pay the government's fees, legal fees, as well as your own. Or you can settle now, and they won't admit what they did, but everybody watching will know. I mean, you don't pay someone £400,000 for no reason. So people watching, the ordinary people watching, okay, the government doesn't come into court and say, okay, it was us, we did it. We were involved in collusion between the UDR and in the murder of Eugene Reevy's three brothers. But everybody watching knows exactly what's happening, that the government will do anything. By the way, it's our money. It's our money that the government's spending, the MOD is spending to defend themselves. It's our money, and it's our money that people like Eugene Reevy are getting, taxpayers' money. But the government will do anything rather than admit in open court what they did. Any money at all. But it's not the government's money, it's ours.
And as we know, there have been successive British governments who've promoted legislation limiting investigations into legacy cases. So from your perspective, and what impact has this had on victims' families and on efforts to establish?
It's been shocking what they tried to do, the Legacy Act. As it was said at the time, it was what even Pinochet or Verwoerd in South Africa would have been proud of that. But in the end, they had to backtrack. But they're still fighting a rearguard action. They're still trying to limit the amount of truth that families can get at. They're still fighting every clause in the House of. I mean, there's still very powerful lobby in the House of Commons, particularly on the Conservative benches. But there are some real bad boys on the Labour benches too, who are trying to avoid a really honest, thorough, human rights compliant legacy process being agreed and passed through, because I think London knows what's going to, if the truth did come out, the one thing that they're always concerned about is protecting their own reputation internationally. And if it came out what they really did during the conflict in Northern Ireland, and that would be extremely embarrassing for them. And that's what they care about. They don't really care about the families or the truth. They just want to protect themselves. And they've got very deep pockets. They can afford any number of lawyers. And the reason the Bloody Sunday inquiry was so expensive was that the MOD appealed everything, and everything had to go through the High Court, which is extremely expensive. I mean, the truth costs nothing. Preventing the truth coming out is very expensive, as we can see.
Mm-hmm. And there is a difference, of course, between establishing the truth and finding justice. But
there's
about that many times on this program.
I mean, justice for the families at this stage, most of them don't want to see elderly men dragged into court, and they know it won't happen, because the people who were really in control are out there on the golf courses and gin and tonics and big salaries and big pensions, and they're pretty much untouchable to get them in front of the courts and get them to admit what they did. And get convicted for what they did. It's a really hard battle for the families and for human rights advocates in the North.
Absolutely. And I'm conscious as well that we would have many people in the audience or attending tonight and maybe watching later on, and I have my own wee boy behind me coming in and out of the door who haven't actually lived through the war, who didn't live through what we experienced, but they're increasingly interested in the history of the North and the war. So the question I would have is, perhaps, what lessons do you think they should draw from your research in this book into collusion, into state power, into continuing the campaign, not just for truth, but for justice?
Oh, goodness me. I don't know. I really don't know. Um, the generation that's coming up, I mean, just don't trust the government, trust your government, and make sure that you have strong laws to protect your human rights and your civil rights, if you can possibly, because that's the only thing that between you and that's the only thing we have to protect us is the law, and the law's not perfect, but it's all we've got. And I fundamentally believe that very few people in the North have heard of a gentleman called Frank Kitson. I don't even know if you've heard of him. But the two things that he wrote that I would advise young people to keep their eye on is he wrote that if you're in a civil conflict, then the law becomes just another process for disposing of unwanted members of the public. I mean, he actually believed in obeying the law, but what he believed in is changing the law to make it easy for the state to obey the law, because it's been changed to such a state, to such a point that it's you can support it. And the other thing he said was that he took Mao Zedong's dictum of, the gorilla swims in the community like a fish through water, and he turned it around and said, well, if you can't catch the fish, if you're a member of a government and you're facing an insurgency, if you can't catch the fish, i.e. your enemy, by a hook or crook, then poison the water. And I think that's what was going on in mid-70s in Mid-Ulster, was they were poisoning the water, that they were doing their best to turn the entire community against republicanism, against people who demanded their rights. They were trying to terrorize an entire community into going along with their policies, and they failed. They failed, but an awful lot of people died as a result, unnecessarily and tragically. And in the end, it didn't make any difference. So, I mean, I look on Kitson as an utter, complete failure. His policies were a complete failure, unless his policies were just looking after number one, in which case he was pretty good at that.
Maybe at this point, because we're say halfway through, we'll invite Tommy in just for a quick word or two. Tommy, great to have
Thank you.
here. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Róisín. Thank you, Anne. That was an excellent presentation. We've always, for a long, long time, admired your contribution to peace and justice in this part of the world. I think, unfortunately, I am aware of the existence of a man called Frank Kitson and his book, several of his books, Low Intensity Operations, and the fact that he had practiced his career before he come to the north of Ireland in Malaya, Kenya, and other parts of the empire. But I think too that what you're saying about the policy that Kitson was involved in orchestrating, that we're talking about the reason why the British establishment has to cover it up. And I think the reason isn't just to hide the facts, but to hide the rationale behind what they were doing. I remember talking to one of the HET detectives, and I won't mention his name, but he was a very honest man, and he mentioned to me that, for example, the death of my brother and uncle was, he said, part of a counterinsurgency strategy that the British were practicing, the British intelligence and their military machine was practicing a counterinsurgency strategy. As you said, to poison the water, that it wasn't just a matter of vindictiveness or dislike, but there was actually a coherent strategy behind what they're doing to terrorize the support base for the struggle. And I think this, your work has done an enormous service to revealing the truth. But I think it's the fact that we're looking at our counterinsurgency strategy, and that it's not just, and I'm reluctant here to question anything you would say, Anne, but nor am I doing so. But I think it's more than just embarrassment on behalf of the state. There is the conscious realization that since they've used it in so many other parts of the world that they may have to use it again. And that if it was to be known that it is actually a counterinsurgency strategy rather than just malfeasance, that it would prevent them using it again. Because ultimately, I do believe that there's an innate decency in the vast majority of the British population, working class population, that if they were to know the truth, that they would not tolerate their masters and their government carrying out the atrocities that they have carried out for centuries. But perhaps, I'm not sure, that's just my thinking or someone else maybe. But thanks, Anne. It was a pleasure to hear you speak. It's always been a pleasure.
Well, I agree, Tommy, that the vast majority of British people, if they had an idea about what had gone on over here, would be as, I think they'd be as appalled as I was when I kind of came to a realization of it. But just to give you an idea, when I wrote Lethal Allies, the publishing company decided to hire a PR outfit in Britain to spread the word in England or in Britain. And the PR company, the woman who was in charge of the account, read Lethal Allies, was stunned by it, horrified by it, very impressed by it, and sent out 1,000 press releases to all her best contacts, every radio show, every magazine, all of her contacts, 1,000 press releases saying this is an incredible book. It reveals shocking truths. It's really important. She did not get one single response phone call back. Not in 1,000, never happened to her before. Not one single person called her back. And, we did our very best to promote the book ourselves through speaking in clubs and GA clubs. And I did a couple of tours of America. I went to Australia and New Zealand, and we went all over Ireland, and wherever we were invited in London, we went. And of course, as you know, Sean Murray did his film Unquiet Graves, which was shown on RTE eventually after a long battle. And but the great British public, what happened in Ireland is still the unknown unknown.
Because at the moment, there's a challenge to the jury system in England. And with this campaign to save our juries, and I find that a lot of people in England are totally unaware of the fact that they haven't had a jury in the north of Ireland in 50, 60 years.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Yeah.
And plastic bullets aren't used in Britain either.
And as Emma started this conversation, at the very beginning, that Emma is sort of has come politicized or new into this scene of just questioning how the news presents things through Palestine as well. Like that it's kind of been a catalyst for an awful lot of people who have for so long have been saying we had no idea. So the jury system and all the way that it's been conducted now, if you look at the Filton 25 and what's happening there and the prescription of Palestine action, it is really, in a way, I suppose the good outcome of that is that it is exposing how the judiciary system works, how the law works, not to protect us or our rights that we think we have, but actually to protect the interests of empire.
Yeah, I'm not completely hopeless, I think things are, I'm not a kind of sackcloth and ashes and it's all hopeless, we're doomed. But I do think there is hope, but I think that what's happened with Gaza and that the fact that people in Britain are standing up to be counted there is hope.
Absolutely, that is the hope, that people are in their thousands, they're in their millions, they're waking up, they're seeing, they're taking action, and that they're questioning the entire system and looking for an alternative way to live and another vision. Another world is possible. So
But the opposition is
hope.
very strong as well. I mean, you just have to look at what happened to Jeremy Corbyn, who was Zionism was, anti-Semitism was used to destroy that potential. So I mean, it's all to play for, but it's very interesting times, I suppose.
Which is why we keep saying as well here with the Pat O'Donnell Forum and the Social Rights Ireland that it's not just about Palestine, or the movement can't just be a pro-Palestine movement. We are anti-imperialists. we are anti-Zionists, we have no problem saying that, and we are anti-fascist. So I suppose our job, we feel, is to move on the pro-Palestine movement and to advance and to progress understanding, thinking and questioning as well. We might switch over now because time's ticking, and I might go back to you, Emma. I know a couple of people have their hands up, but if you wouldn't mind waiting till the end, because the next section of the programme I'm going to hand over to Emma. You've just finished reading the book. Might want to interrogate Anne on the fiction, Anne.
Yeah, it's the first two books I wrote. Holy Cross was about that dispute in North Belfast, the blockade of the children, where a bomb and pornography and urine was thrown at little kids on their way to school, and then Lethal Allies, as we know, it was about 120 plus murders. Pretty grim stuff. And when I wrote Crossing Over, the idea was that it would be slightly less grim, which I hope it is. It's meant to be entertaining and fun and enjoyable to read, as well as it's got some hard little nuggets in there, but it is meant to be a bit more fun, a bit slightly more lighthearted.
It's funny that it's called fiction because, of course, it's fiction, but it's far from, you say that's more of a beach read. It's absolutely not. It's when I read it and then I had watched Unquiet Graves afterwards, there were so many. I'm like, that's that, and that's that, and that's that. But then you have that lovely flow. I know that for writers, often there's a problem of keep the story moving, keep sentences moving, and that was definitely not a problem that you suffered from because it was just moving the whole way through.
Well, that's what I was trying to do, make a page turner, make it enjoyable to read as well. There may be a few hard truths in there somewhere, but it's also meant to be fun and enjoyable. There should be a few laughs and a bit of humanity in it, and a bit of human relationships. There's even some romance in there if you look hard enough.
There definitely there is some romances, and I suppose from to lean on what you were just saying about the ultimate goal was always inquiries with British collusion, and for families, and for revealing the truths that the families never got. But in the absence of inquiries, state inquiries that we knew, or you knew probably would never come, or would come with so many obstructions or over such a long period of time, that wouldn't have the same effect. So both in Crossing Over and in reality, of course, there was this thing of panels of experts and exposing sort of unofficial inquiries.
For a family who's already been traumatized by by a loss, by grief, for them, it's very easy to say, right, we must have a public inquiry, but public inquiries are horrendous for families. Just ask the Bloody Sunday families how they felt. It go interminable. Once the state's in control, there has to be agreed terms of reference, and then there's lawyers appointed, and then there's it is a horrendous experience it should be possible to devise a way of inquiring into what happened during the conflict that does not necessarily involve lawyers getting paid thousands of pounds a day, and does not necessarily involve families being dragged through months, if not years, of court appearances. And because it's very, very hard for families going into a court or into the Finucane family are just about to start on that process now, and they're very expert, and they're all lawyers, and they know what they're doing, but and it's going to be tough on them. But because the state will twist and turn and do anything to avoid telling the truth. And it's very, very, it's public inquiries are not a panacea. I mean, inquiries are important, vital, but not necessarily public inquiries under the Inquiries Act as passed by the House of Commons, as passed by the British Parliament. If there must be a better way of getting to the truth than having the full panoply of lawyers and judges and long drawn out processes. There has to be a better way. And it's not beyond the mind of man. It's so important as well, because I don't think there can ever be reconciliation in the North until there is a mutual understanding of what actually happened and how both communities in different ways were manipulated and used and exploited and lied to. I don't think it's possible in the North for there to be true reconciliation without that process. But it's not been devised yet, and London has done everything it possibly can to prevent that happening.
And it wouldn't be legally binding without going through that horrific process, isn't that right? Even with
Well,
the naming and shaming internationally, it puts pressure. And
well, if you've got an inquiry is useless unless you can compel witnesses. If you can, I mean, at the moment, like the police ombudsman, if a retired police officer chooses not to answer questions, they can do that. You cannot, once someone's retired and they're not working for the police or MI5 or British military intelligence or whatever, you can't compel people to come to, you can't compel people to answer questions. You can't compel people to tell the truth. It's a very complex process, and one that I'm not qualified to talk about in any detail, you'll be pleased to hear. But I mean, other people have. There are groups in the North, such as the Committee on the Administration of Justice, and there's the Law Department at Queen's University have done an awful lot of work on on the best way of getting the truth about what happened during the conflict out into the open. But that's not on its own, it's not good enough, because London won't accept their recommendations.
thanks for that, Anne. On a very aside note, and this is a much lighter note, there was a reference to the Flowers of Maharalio in the book, the song.
Yeah.
And there was a folk session this week, and I was thinking, God, I don't know that song at all. So I've been listening to the Flowers of Maharalio,
It's an
and
enchanting song, isn't it?
it's beautiful. I think with your book, there's a real overlap of political and personal, and it's
Yeah.
done really nicely in that that is life. The politics are immersed with the
Yeah.
personal, and
Well, when
sometimes
I
they aren't separated out like that. It's nice. I really enjoy that. I think it was very well done in the book with the
Well, when I
characters.
started writing the book, I knew everybody was going to say, "Oh, you're really Lena Dawson, aren't you?" I mean, when I first started writing the book, I never intended for it to be published. It was entertainment for myself. I honestly didn't think it would ever get published. So, I mean, Lena Dawson, her surname is my mother's maiden name. I would never have chosen Dawson but by the time I got to the publication date, she was Lena Dawson in my mind, so she stayed it. But one of the things I decided to do to try and I wanted to I didn't want it to just to be about me, I wanted it to be about somebody else who I shared the principles of and some of the experiences, but who wasn't me. And so I decided that I would have her fall in love with a UDR man. And so I created a UDR man out of nowhere. And then I decided that he wasn't attractive enough. And why would a nice person like Lena fall for this UDR man? Because the way I'd written him, it wasn't convincing. So then I decided what I would do is, I don't know if you know the film, you probably do, A Fish Called Wanda. When Wanda goes mental, when the John Cleese character speaks in different languages, that's what turns her on. And I thought, well, what would turn what I mean, that wouldn't turn me on, but I do admire and find and I hugely admire someone who is really talented artistically and particularly musically. I love music. Music has kept me going through many years, difficult years. And I thought, well, I'll tell you what, then I'll make this UDR man a musician, a pianist. And that gave me an excuse as well to take some of the beautiful Irish songs that I really love, not songs like Raglan Road and Molly Malone that everybody knows, but songs that are equally as beautiful as that, but which not so many people know. I used My Lagan Love at one point, and I used The Flower of Maharali, and I used My Singing Bird as well, which is I don't know if anybody's watched you can get it on YouTube. Sinead O'Connor and Éile O'Lynard singing My Singing Bird, and then a Nuna's version of The Flower of Maharali. And I used that in the creative process to try and make Edward, who's the UDR man, a bit more attractive. But I could also slide in some of my favorite songs.
I don't know if it's a spoiler. I don't think so, but there's a lovely scene in the book where um the Lena has had an experience with her IRA client, and he's been speaking about music and Irish history, and he spoke about a song, and Edward then you're
Yes,
is
yes,
then playing the song. So, you know,
yeah.
there's a lovely I
Yes, and
suppose
she realizes
universality of
these
the
two men
music.
in
Yeah.
her life,
Mm.
one of whom's in the UDR and the other's a Republican, and both of them love that beautiful air, the Coolin. Both of
Hmm.
them love that, and it just makes us realize how tragic it is that they're both fighting each other when the potential was there for that never to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Well,
just go on
something,
ahead,
sorry to
Róisín.
cut across, Emma, but like something that you do bring up in the book that's very important, and as well, you keep reminding as well as presenting the facts is that, it wasn't a Catholic versus Protestant war. It just wasn't. How we were all, we so many, such a huge effort went into presenting the war as like about a religious conflict
Well,
and
it suited the British
the
narrative.
prods and the tags,
Mm.
exactly. Like it wasn't. So it's an important reminder just when you
Well,
say that.
to a great extent, they won that one, because that's how people do see it. I mean, most people in Ireland still see it that way, let alone internationally.
Well, there's only one war, and that's class war. That's what we say. That's the only war that we're prepared to get involved in and to fight for. We might wrap up unless I'm just. Did you know, Anne, that Emma is a singer? So we might have to when we come back for the book club. Emma, you learn that song, and
I'll be here with the flowers and Baralio.
she's a
I have
great
to learn it
singer.
properly first.
Yeah,
Well, it is a beautiful song, and there is Anuna's version of it. Anuna, the choir, Anuna,
yeah.
their version on YouTube of it. It's a lovely song. It's a song about love across the barriers. It's a kind of a mixed relationship. It's not in your face, but if you read between the lines, that's what it's about. And I would hate anyone to think after the discussion a moment ago that I was suggesting in any way that that crossing over is about both people saying, "Oh well, we could all be friends together and everything's going to be." It's not, that's not what the book is about. It's about potential and about waste and about lack of communication. But it's not kind of Romeo and Juliet bit. I resisted that very, and I've started writing another one, but I don't know whether I'll ever finish this other one. But I have started because one of the nicest things about writing fiction, which I discovered late on, is that people come to you and they tell you, "I read your book the other day. I read it until 4 in the morning. I couldn't go to sleep," which is wonderful for an author to hear that you've created characters who are so real that other people read. It's just a magic feeling. And also, people also say, "I was furious when I finished the book because I wanted to find out what happened to Lena next." And the thing is,
Well,
Lena
be
doesn't
a
exist,
sequel.
but except in my imagination and except on. But I
We're
want to
all
know what
guests.
happens to Lena next as well.
Oh, it's been lovely talking to you. And if you have time to stay on, would you be open if
Yeah,
we don't
sure.
record for
Yeah,
some?
if there's people there who've got questions and they haven't had a chance to answer them, yes, of course I'll stay on. Yeah, it's
That's
a
lovely.
beautiful evening, but it's not over yet. So I'll stay on for a while. I'd
Thank
be
you
happy
very
to do
much.
that.
So we'll just maybe conclude the program, the recording of tonight's program, with our brilliant guest speaker, Anne Cadwallader, alongside our comrade Tommy McKerney of the Padre O'Donnell Socialist Republican Forum. We are in great company tonight, and it's lovely to hear and to have that exchange. Thank you very much, Anne and Tommy. And thank you, Emma, for arranging all of this. It wouldn't have happened if you hadn't attended the Tyrone Association event and made this contact. And we hope to have you back. And I'll have to read the book though, and there's nothing
Well,
wrong with
I hope
but
it's not a chore. I
escapism.
hope it's something pleasant. The other two books, yes, definitely
Yeah.
hard work. But I
Yeah.
hope this one isn't quite so hard work.
Well, and I teach English and history, so I mean, fiction. I was always my gra, and that drew me to do my degree in English. But I have to say, I had switched off fiction, poetry. I just found all of it too fantastical, too surreal, too unrealistic as well. And I have been totally immersed in just learning an awful lot of things that I did not know. I'm trying to catch up on learning that doesn't happen actually in school or university. So it'll be nice this summer. Emma said we'd swap books again, and it'll be nice to try to go back into the fiction for a wee change. Thanks, Anne, for your time. Stay on, everybody, if you can, for a quick Q&A. Otherwise, we'll see you next Monday at 7 o'clock. Slán go fóill.